The Israeli foreign minister says a ceasefire in Lebanon requires Hezbollah's disarmament and assurances of border distancing. Israel targets the suburbs of Beirut after issuing military warnings. And an Israeli airstrike kills 5 and injures dozens in northern Gaza. It's 10 minutes to 8 p.m. Cairo local time, and now you're watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
الوضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Israeli media has reported that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has given preliminary approval to a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, with a deal reportedly imminent. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz met with the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle Eastern Affairs, Dan Shapiro, to discuss efforts to secure the ceasefire. Israeli media speculates that an agreement could be reached this week, though disagreements remain over implementation mechanisms and Hezbollah's positions. Israeli sources have revealed that Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir opposes a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. Ben-Gvir stated that such an agreement would be a significant mistake, arguing that it would squander a historic opportunity to eliminate Hezbollah, according to his remarks. Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has said a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon will hinge on enforcement that would keep Hezbollah disarmed and away from the border. Sa'ar added that the test for any agreement will not be in words or phrasing, but in enforcement only. That comes as Israel strikes the southern borders and suburbs of Beirut with heavy airstrikes. Israel's United Nations Ambassador Danny Danon has stated that ceasefire talks with Hezbollah are progressing, but emphasized Israel's right to strike southern Lebanon if necessary. Speaking ahead of a United Nations Security Council meeting, Danon noted that Israel's cabinet is expected to convene soon to deliberate on the proposed ceasefire agreement.
I think for us it's important what will happen after, that Hezbollah will not be allowed to come back to the fence.
A senior Israeli official has confirmed that Israel's cabinet will meet Tuesday to approve a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. Lebanese sources said an agreement could be imminent. While Israeli strikes on Lebanon continued, optimism grew among Lebanese officials. The U.S. proposed plan involves an Israeli withdrawal, Lebanese army deployment, and a monitoring committee chaired by the United States. Both sides reportedly resolved key disputes, advancing efforts to de-escalate the conflict. For more analysis, we now move to Henny Saif in the newsroom. To you, Henny.
Thank you, Raham. And for further analysis on the potential ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, we're joined from Beirut by the military and strategic expert, Brigadier General Adel Mashmoushi. Welcome to Qnews, sir. First off, how significant is Prime Minister Netanyahu's preliminary approval of the ceasefire deal in Lebanon, and what does it indicate about Israel's strategy moving forward?
My greatness for you and for all the viewers. Actually, we have seen some serious indicators from the Israeli occupation side that the Israeli leaders are preliminarily agree for start the negotiations and solutions that the United States are supporting after they get some security guarantees. This actually, despite all the escalations that we have seen in the recent 24 hours, the targeting of the southern neighborhood, but these signals are giving us some hope, and I think both sides, the Lebanese side and the Israeli sides, are exhausted from the operations, especially that it was proved for everyone that military solutions are not sustainable, whatever for the Lebanese side or the Israeli side. And here we can see the importance to go forward in these negotiations, to have some sustainable pillars between the two fronts, the Lebanese side and the Israeli side. And this is important. And in addition to 17, I think many support is giving that regard, especially after the United States promoting and after having the oversee committee from other and different states that will have pressure to impose Lebanese side and Israeli side, and after the Hezbollah commitment by giving the approval for Ibrahim Bibari that he is able to withdraw in the to the north of the Litani River. This gives us the indicators that we are moving in a diplomatic solution in that frame. However, because of the previous experiences and because of the different divisions inside the Israeli war cabinet, we need to wait for the coming 24 hours until we have seen official announced by the Israeli official occupation leaders to announce that they officially approve this solution, which they supported after these meetings and with special envoy Hakestein.
Yes. Well,
yes.
Given the reported disagreements over the implementation mechanism and Hezbollah's positions, how likely is it that a final agreement be reached soon?
I think, as we said before, the military results didn't achieve anything except destruction and civility for both, and it's impossible with the technology. The air weapons of Israel and what and the other tanks and weapons, and also from the Hezbollah side, as they have different ranges of missiles and drones. That means that whatever was the gap between the two military powers, it's impossible to maintain peace if both parties didn't commit with ceasefire, and both parties need to understand that we need to have these pillars for a sustainable truce from both sides. Yes, the current truce, they are only talking about 60 days, but I believe that this truce, maybe in those 60 days, they could find a permanent solution between Lebanon and Israel of current agreement. Maybe they are going to have to draw these map again as they used to do before, and so we were of the problem.
Well, sir,
yes,
if you may allow me now, Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has strongly opposed the ceasefire, arguing that it would waste a historic opportunity to eliminate Hezbollah. So what are the potential implications of his stance for the future of the ceasefire?
أعتقد visions inside Israel, we cannot have I don't think they were able to eliminate Hezbollah completely, because Hezbollah, at the end of the day, is one of the political groups inside Lebanon. And in that frame, we need to see 1701 as it composed of two parts. The first part is regarding the conflict between Lebanon and the Israeli occupation forces, and the other part, which is actually based on the Ta'if agreement to disarmament all the groups and political groups inside Lebanon, and only give the weapons to the Lebanese army and the security forces.
Well, these political divisions within Israel regarding the ceasefire, how might they affect the broader regional stability and prospects for peace in Lebanon?
That for the Lebanese side to have internal dialogues to take a final decision in that regard. It's very difficult to have these issues stacking in order to finish to the Netanyahu's government. I don't think this is possible right now. I think we need to have internal commitment and to have this support of many states, the US and France, for the agreement that promotes to have a mechanism in the
Military and strategic expert Brigadier General Adel Mashmoushi, thank you very much, sir, for your insights. Now we move back to the studio and I'll hand you over to Rahim. Rahim.
Thank you so much, Henny, for that interview. We move to Lebanon's displacement crisis that deepens as nearly 1.9 million people are forced from their homes due to Israel's war on Lebanon.
The number of displaced individuals in Lebanon has risen sharply to nearly 1.9 million since October, according to a report by Lebanon's Council of Ministers. The surge reflects the escalating impact of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, which has significantly affected civilian populations and infrastructure across the country. The Council's report highlights the unprecedented scale of displacement in recent years, with families fleeing violence and seeking refuge in overcrowded shelters or makeshift accommodations. The displacement crisis is straining Lebanon's economy as the country grapples with limited resources to address the needs of those affected. The Israeli aggression in Lebanon has led to repeated cross-border attacks, further destabilizing southern Lebanon and forcing thousands to abandon their homes. Humanitarian organizations have warned of a worsening situation if hostilities continue, calling for urgent international intervention to support relief efforts and ensure the safety of civilians. The latest figures underscore the far-reaching consequences of the conflict, as Lebanon faces mounting challenges in providing aid and shelter for its displaced population. The report serves as a stark reminder of the urgent need for de-escalation and a coordinated response to address the growing humanitarian crisis.
An Israeli strike has hit Beirut's southern suburbs following prior military warnings. Smoke rose over Chia as hostilities with Hezbollah escalated. Lebanon's deputy speaker said no major barriers remain to a U.S. proposed 60-day truce. The conflict has displaced over 1 million people in Lebanon amid intense airstrikes and rocket exchanges. Earlier, Israel had hit Beirut's southern suburbs again, leaving buildings damaged and debris scattered. That came after a powerful Israeli airstrike killed at least 29 people in central Beirut in the day before. The 2-week escalation coincides with the US-led ceasefire talks. Israel has intensified airstrikes on Lebanon since September, escalating tensions following the war on Gaza. The Lebanese Health Ministry has announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on Lebanon climbed to over 3,700 and over 15,600 wounded since October 8th of last year. That came as the Israeli occupation raids resulted in at least 84 deaths and 213 injuries over the past 24 hours. Earlier, Israeli airstrikes targeted a Lebanese army post in southern Lebanon, resulting in the killing of one Lebanese army soldier, while 18 others were injured. The Arab League has held an emergency meeting in Cairo, condemning Israel's threat to extend military operations into Iraq and urging the international community to halt Israel's aggressive policies. The Arab League expressed support for Iraq and condemned Israel's actions in Palestine, Lebanon and Syria, as well as its hostilities towards UN agencies. The Arab League also criticized the US for blocking Gaza ceasefire resolutions in the UN Security Council. Now we move on to the latest developments in Gaza. Palestinian medical sources have reported that 5 people were killed and several others wounded in an Israeli airstrike targeting a gathering of civilians in Jabalia, north of Gaza. 2 more Palestinians lost their lives and others were injured in a strike near the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza. Israeli artillery also shelled displaced people in the Manshia neighborhood and areas surrounding shelters in Beit Lahia, as well as Tel Zatar in the Jabalia refugee camp. Israeli occupation forces have bombed a house in the Palestinian city of Rafah, resulting in 4 fatalities and several injuries. In central Gaza, paramedics from the Red Crescent transported 5 injured civilians to Al Auda hospital in Nusayrat camp following an artillery strike on residential areas. Meanwhile, Palestinian media reported that the occupation forces demolished residential buildings in the Twin Towers area northwest of Gaza City. Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbed to over 44,200 and over 104,500 wounded. Medical reports said that the Israeli occupation forces' operations in Gaza have caused 35 deaths and 94 injuries in the last 24 hours. That came as 4 other people were killed and several others injured in an Israeli attack on a building in Al Burej refugee camp in central Gaza. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy has stated that the UK would follow due legal process if Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visits the country. Speaking at a G7 meeting in Rome, Lammy responded to questions about whether London would enforce the ICC arrest warrant against Netanyahu. He affirmed that the UK is a signatory to the Rome Statute and adheres to its obligations under international and humanitarian law, adding that should such a visit occur, there would be a judicial process and the relevant due legal procedures would be followed. Britain has announced its most extensive sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet, targeting 30 vessels and 2 major insurance companies. Ahead of the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Italy, British foreign minister sanctions ships which circumvent Western oil restrictions, and adding that such ships have transported billions in Russian oil over the past year. The measures bring the total number of sanctioned oil tankers to 73. The UK also sanctioned 2 Russian insurers, including VSK, vowing to challenge any vessels passing through British waters without legitimate insurance.
And of course, to avoid Russia.
Israel's central bank has maintained its interest rate at 4.5%, holding steady for the 7th consecutive time as it evaluates the impact of its ongoing war on Gaza on the economy and inflationary pressures. The decision reflects concerns over inflation, which stood at 3.5% in October, exceeding the government's target range, and is expected to rise further due to the upcoming value-added tax increase in January. The central bank anticipates that inflation may not fall back within the target range until 2025. The economy is projected to grow at just 0.5% this year, down from an earlier forecast of 1.5%. Global stock markets rose, with European and Asian indices tracking gains from Wall Street as investors welcomed President-elect Donald Trump's nomination of billionaire Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary, viewing it as a climbed 0.4%, while France's CAC 40 advanced 0.1%, and the UK's FTSE 100 rose 0.45%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added 1% in early deals, while the S&P 500 gained 0.75%. The Nasdaq was also 0.8% higher. In Asia, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 and South Korea's Kospi led gains, rising 1.3%. Oil prices fell more than $1 after Axios reported that Israel and Lebanon had agreed to the terms of the deal to end Israel's war on Lebanon, citing an unnamed senior U.S. official. Brent crude futures dropped 1.78% to $73.83 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 2.02% at $69.80 per barrel. Gold prices declined 1% as investors booked profits following a 5-session rally to a 3-week high, while the announcement of fund manager Scott Bessent as a new U.S. Treasury Secretary tempered safe haven buying. Spot gold was down 1% at $2,686.73 per ounce. U.S. gold futures said 0.9% at $2,688.40. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. The Israeli foreign minister says a ceasefire in Lebanon requires Hezbollah's disarmament and assurances of border distancing. Israel targets the suburbs of Beirut after issuing military warnings. And an Israeli airstrike kills 5 and injures dozens in northern Gaza. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and News EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.